Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast, in which a long-time Agatha Christie collector and her Christie novice husband discuss the works of the Queen of Crime in publication order. In this episode, we take a look at The Man in the Brown Suit.
Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast. We are your hosts.
Gillian Porter, a long-time Agatha Christie reader and collector.
And her husband, Alan Porter, who after almost 40 years of sharing a house with Agatha Christie books, has decided that he should read them.
We'll be tackling the books in UK publication order as detailed on the official Agatha Christie website and sharing our thoughts on each from the viewpoint of someone familiar with them
and someone reading them for the first time.
In this episode, we'll be taking a look at The Man in the Brown Suit, first published in 1924. What was going on in the world, Alan?
Good question. For those who listen to the podcast on a regular basis, know that before we dive into the book itself, we thought it would be interesting to place it into the context of what was happening in the UK and the world at large at that time. So let's wind the clock back to 1924. Around the world, things were moving, not in a good direction. Adolf Hitler is sentenced to 5 years in Landsberg prison in Germany for his participation in the 1923 beer hall putsch, but he serves less than 9 months. Fascists win the elections in Italy with a 2/3 majority. Mercedes-Benz is formed by the merging of companies owned by Daimler and Carl Benz. And US Army pilots John Harding and Eric Nelson complete the first aerial circumnavigation of the globe. It took them 175 days and they made 74 stops along the way before they returned to their starting point in Seattle, which I did not know.
Me either.
In the UK, Ramsay MacDonald became the first Labour Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The British Empire exhibition opened in London. It was the largest colonial exhibition with 58 countries of the empire represented. In less cheery news, an airliner crashed soon after takeoff from London's Croydon Airport, killing all 8 people aboard. And this led to the first public inquiry into a civil aviation accident ever held. And John Logie Baird was working in Hastings, started to send some rudimentary television pictures over a short distance. And what was going on with Agatha in 1924, Jill?
Well, she'd been pretty busy, as well as The Man in the Brown Suit and Poirot Investigates, which is a series of short stories we will cover in next month's episode. She had a book of poems published, The Road of Dreams. She had written poetry ever since she was a child. I think she'd finally reached being enough famous that people were actually happy to publish her poems. I didn't really find out much about them, it was a book of poems and The Road of Dreams. I wasn't able to find out if it was in publication or anything. There didn't seem to be much on the internet about that, but I just thought it was an interesting little snippet.
So we won't be covering it on the podcast?
No.
Fair enough.
Archie and Agatha found their dream place in the country in Sunningdale in Surrey. They found a flat and a big house that had been divided into 4 flats, and it was close to the Sunningdale golf course, so Archie was very happy. Agatha was busy learning to drive her new Morris Cowley. As we heard in the last one, she'd earned enough money to buy herself a car. And then the general strike hit, so there were no trains. So Archie needed Agatha to drive him to his job in London, and she was very nervous. But once she got the hang of it, she loved her car. And she is quoted as saying, "Oh, what a joy the car was, and it widened my whole horizon." Agatha signed with a new publisher, Collins, but still owed Bodley Head one more book.
And talking of books, just before we dive in, a regular reminder that on this podcast, we will be talking about plots and stories that range from 50 to just over 100 years old, and in several cases have been adapted for TV and or movies. But as this podcast demonstrates, people are coming new to the works of Agatha Christie at any time and may not be familiar with the details of the stories under discussion. So this is a spoiler warning that we will be diving into plot and character details, as well as talking about who done it and why. So if you aren't familiar with the story under discussion, you might want to pause the podcast here, then find a copy and give it a read before returning to the discussion. Or you can keep listening whether you know the story or not. It's your choice. And with that said, let's dive into The Man in the Brown Suit.
First, we'll do a quick plot synopsis. Anne Bedingfield is on her own and ready for adventures when one comes her way. She sees a man die in a tube station and picks up a piece of paper dropped nearby. The message on the paper leads her to South Africa as she fits more pieces of the puzzle together about the death she witnessed. There is a murder in England the next day, and the murderer attempts to kill her on the ship en route to Cape Town. For further details, take a look at the Wikipedia page for The Man in the Brown Suit. The details will be in the show notes. Okay, so first we'll start with our thoughts on the plot. I found this a quick, fun read. I had memories of not liking the story very much previously, so I was a bit apprehensive going into this one, but I actually enjoyed my reread. I wonder if that was partly because I had the time to sit down and read it mostly in one day, so it flowed. And in that respect, the book keeps up a good, nice pace without being too rushed. Left me plenty of time to get to know Anne and why I was going to care about what happened to her. I found there was a good mixture of action and quiet. And I also especially loved that she had Anne surfing in South Africa and shared her joy of the sport in a book like that. I thought that was really clever. What did you think, Alan?
I like the surfing bit too. If you remember when I read it, I called it out to you and said, "Hey, she's got surfing in the book." So I thought that was a fun little bit, a nice little Easter egg if you knew much about Agatha Christie and her passion for surfing. So I thought that was fun. This actually wasn't my first read of the story. I read it last year when the book was lying around an Airbnb we were staying in, and I did not like it at all. So I was a bit like Jill, a bit apprehensive about coming to this one again after such a short time. However, this time around, I sort of got into the spirit of it and was along for the ride. Having said that, the actual plot line was a muddle of too many things going on, too much coincidences, too many characters knowing things they shouldn't have, and unnecessary reveals. But Christie's writing style, which I think we'll get into, pulled me along with the narrative on this one. So I was pleasantly surprised by how much I actually did enjoy the experience this time around. Obviously, still had some issues with the plot, but enjoyed it a lot more this time around than I did that first effort just over a year ago. Jill mentioned it in plot things, but this one was very clearly set in a particular area of the world. So let's sort of dig into the setting. I definitely got a sense of how the British perceived colonial South Africa and its surroundings here, very much of the time. In retrospect, some of Christie's approach, given the region's future struggles and history to us, future for her, come across as a bit culturally insensitive, but Jill and I were discussing this last night. It is very much a product of its time, with her views on colonialism and the residents of South Africa and the economy of South Africa and how things worked. I think you have to take it as it very much being a snapshot of the colonial vision of the South Africa in 1920s. I particularly enjoyed the boat section journey, especially this description of standing out on the deck, looking out at the phosphorus illuminations in the wake of the boat. And that brought back memories of me. I used to do that during my time on board, during my very short stint in the Merchant Navy when I was a lot younger. And that was actually one of my favorite things to do at the end of my shift, was to go grab a mug of tea and stand out on the deck and just watch the wake at night with the phosphorescence. So that really brought back a lot of memories for me. You can tell that Christie's been on long sea voyages from the way she writes about life on board ship here. What about you, Joe? What did you think about the setting?
I agree that some of the discussion in the book is a bit problematic, but you do have to accept it as a product of its time with somebody of her life experiences and education rather than how we see it now. So I agree with you on that. I felt that all the setting came alive in all of it. Back in London, you kind of knew where you were, because we've been there, understood what a tube station looked like. That kind of stuff was very lively. But I think the South Africa locations and the boat trip were the ones that really came alive. You could almost feel the heat when she was talking about it when they were on the train and how hot it was and how thirsty they were. And I find that fascinating because while each place was lightly sketched, they felt real. I would say for me, there were two of the things. There was the tension of the coming riots, and there was also that first view that Anne described, seeing the waterfalls in Table Mountain. It felt like it was something she had experienced. It felt very real. The humbleness of how fantastic the views were felt real, not like they were written because somebody read about it in another book. So I really liked that the setting really came alive in that respect. And now we'll talk about the characters. I found Anne a complete delight. I was a bit anxious about this because all About Agatha podcast, this was one of their favorites. And I was always like, well, I can't see what's so great about it. I just remember it being a bit tedious. But obviously this time round, I found it very different. I thought she was quite delight. Agatha Christie had written, when you are shy, why not write bright young things? And I think that's what she's doing here. She's giving Anne the personality that she doesn't feel she has because she's shy and prefers to be in the background. You could feel Anne's yearning for excitement, but at the same time, she never really lost her head when she was threatened. And I found that quite refreshing. She didn't go around screaming or anything like you read in some books. I felt like she really thought things through. The other characters were well-rounded, and I definitely felt sorry for Mr. Paget, especially the way Sir Eustace talked about him in his diaries and always ordering him to do things that Paget didn't seem to want to do. I found Sir Eustace quite likable, as Anne did. Like you, Alan, I went in, I knew who the Colonel was. I knew Sir Eustace was the bad guy. And you see those slight hints in it. But I also thought he was quite a delightful, cheery character. You know, as a bad guy, he wasn't all doom and gloom and hardness. And that I found quite interesting. I did feel most of the characters seemed much more vivid than in the previous books, apart from Harry Parks / John Harold / Earsley character, who was the man in the brown suit. He seemed vaguely sketched, as if she didn't really care about him, but felt he had to be there as the center of the book and love interest for Anne. But I didn't feel like you got to know him at all. What did you think?
Like you, I felt the weakest character in it was the man in the brown suit himself. So I'm not actually sure why he was the title character, because he was sort of in and out of the story. He wasn't sort of the central thing. I don't know why they didn't figure out a title around Anne, because it's her story, it's her adventure, rather than the so-called mysterious man in the brown suit, who wasn't that mysterious because they figured out who he was fairly early in the book, and then he was oddly in it, and then he was in it towards the end. And the use of multiple names didn't help in building any connection with him, I felt, because he was using so many different names. You never really figured out who he was. Like you, Anne Bedingfield, I thought was fun, plucky, resourceful heroine. So only while you were just talking, actually, it just made me think, was it sort of a bit of autobiographical wish fulfillment on Agatha Christie's part? Is Anne Bedingfield Agatha Christie, or who Agatha Christie wanted to be?
I think so. I think that's what she was doing here. And I was going to say about the title too. I don't see the sense in that. I mean, I think it was meant to be called something like The Mystery at Mill House Manor. And then that got changed to The Man in the Brown Suit. It is very odd.
Well, we talked about the person she met in South Africa said you should write a story about my place and call it The Mystery at Mill House Manor, didn't he, or something?
Well, the leader of that round the world tour thing they went on. And yes, and that his house was called Mill House.
Okay.
That's where the original title came from. But in her autobiography, it doesn't really explain why it was changed to The Man. It explains that it was changed because she felt that associated too much with Major Belcher. And she changed the character of Sir Eustace, which was loosely based on him. She changed it so much that she didn't really feel like it reflected that. But why it was called The Man in the Brown Suit, I didn't see anything in her autobiography about that.
Like you, I also felt the rest of the cast were well developed, more so in this book than the others that we've read so far. Like you, I grew to like the Secretary Paget, who I think went from being creepily suspicious at the beginning to being a very sympathetic man at the end, who was basically caught up in events beyond his control. I like the gradual reveal of him and the gradual shift in the way that you perceived him going through the story. Yeah, Sir Eustace was something of a lovable rogue. It's going to sound horrible, but he was sort of a murderer with a twinkle in his eye type thing, you know? I like that aspect. The one character I didn't really get, and I think it was more from a practical point of view, was the comedian-like makeup artist, Arthur Minks, alias the Reverend Edward Chichester, alias Miss Pettigrew, alias the Count Sergius Pavlovich. I think all his different characters, the fact that nobody seemed to recognize him much, I think stretched credibility a little too much.
I agree. And you missed out the being the maid on the boat.
Oh, the maid on the boat. Yeah, that didn't have a name, did it? Let's talk about the denouement. Got it right again. As I said, we both actually read this before, so I was aware of who the Colonel was from the outset. So it wasn't really a surprise. But what it was actually, it made reading it a slightly different experience. And I don't know if that's what made it slightly more enjoyable this time. Because reading his narrative from that different light, knowing he was the bad guy, you could see the clues that weren't obvious to me on my first read. This time around, I was actually also struck with the similarity of the mystery mastermind plot device to The Secret Adversary, which, of course, last year I hadn't read. Talking about reveals at the end, I didn't like the identity switch reveal at the end that the love interest, Harry Rayborn, whatever name you were talking him, was really the wealthy aristocrat John Harold Erdsley. Because Harry Lucas had a really interesting backstory. It was a really emotional backstory about being framed for a diamond robbery and then serving in the war and being reported missing and then deciding to hide from it all on an island in a lake in Africa. He was a really sympathetic character, and then to do the he's really the mysterious rich aristocrat rather than this guy who looked at, pulled himself up through all his trauma. I was like, I think that you just like completely undermined the character by that reveal. So I didn't like that. And I thought it was completely unnecessary. That was sort of my thoughts on it.
I agree with you on that one. And I also feel that whole, you have my money, I don't want it. The thing I didn't like about him was that big He-Man character. It was like, I can be rough and rude even to the woman I love because this is who I am. And I'm like, I call bull on that. If you love somebody enough, while they maybe have been happy on the island, you might have wanted enough money to make sure you can have basics to keep you going. Especially seeing as their house burned down on that island, you'd at least take enough money to make sure you built another sturdy shack or whatever for your loved one and family to live in. So, yeah, I thought that was all a bit odd. He was a very odd, brusque character that, to me, didn't really come alive at all. As much as I liked that very much, this whole, again, falling in love at first sight, trooping off, living with him on an island was... Maybe it is part of what this whole myth around true love is meant to be, but I just thought that was all a bit silly. And I felt like the denouement was a little bit of a letdown after the big build-up, not just because I know who the Colonel was, but because it was almost as an aside, oh, yeah, he got away. Then he writes Anne this long letter about his new life he's creating. That was interesting, but the build-up to actually capturing him, that part then just kind of went a bit firework that didn't go off type thing. Damp squib, is it? I also thought the whole thing with Padgett admission to being a married man with 4 children, I'm like, I don't know how he managed to fit all that in if he was a live-in personal secretary, but that was quite funny at the end. But the last bit just didn't quite do it for me. It didn't really quite fit with the rest of the story, I didn't think.
No, I felt it sort of fizzled out too. The Colonel was captured. That thing about, him escaping was pretty much just a throwaway line and it happened off stage. I would have liked to have known more about how he escaped. Not just the fact that he did escape, but, what was it? Because he's clearly a clever, calculating man and he got stuff worked out in advance in case he was captured. And, did he have an escape route planned and things like that? I would have liked a bit more around that, I think.
Yeah, me too. I agree with you. Okay, let's talk about the writing. Overall, I enjoyed the writing, which I feel has developed nicely over her novels. I felt like it was crisp and light. And I'll disagree with you. I didn't feel there was anything extra added in just because. I know you thought it was muddled. I thought it all kind of flowed quite nicely for the kind of mystery story that it was. Having read quite a lot from that era, it seemed to fit in with the rest of them. And I just felt like the descriptions of South Africa really made it come to life for me. I was very impressed how she manages to evoke a certain country or feeling with so few words. I think that is quite a skill. How about you?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I think we've got a light comedy approach here that suits the heroine narrator well. She managed to differentiate between... It was interesting doing that 2 things of having Anne's narrative and then Eustace's diary. I thought was an interesting approach. I thought his diary didn't really read like a diary. it felt a bit like Anne's, where Anne was like narrating it or talking it. His felt like it was sort of, he would think he would be telling you in person. It didn't read like a diary, even though she labeled it as a diary. But I like that dual sort of storytelling approach of having the sort of the two intersecting narratives that sort of come together, and seeing different scenes and different incidents from the two different points of view. I thought was a neat trick. I like that. My problems were that a lot of the story is told through flashback. A lot of the story is told by somebody suddenly sitting down and doing this whole exposition dump. Like, Colonel Ray sitting down and talking about the diamond robbery and all the stuff and setting that up. And then there was another point where Paget sits down and gives a whole exposition dump about something. And in some of them, it's like they're talking about what other people did, but it's other people they haven't necessarily interacted with. And I'm like, well, how would they know that's what happened to this other person? Or how did they know that was set up? So there was a lot of complexities I felt weren't revealed through the narrative. They were revealed through other people just doing these exposition dumps. That, to me, took away a little bit of it. But I will say I'm very impressed. What are we in? 4 books in? Another change of writing style. Very, very impressed by Agatha Christie's ability to tune her writing style to the needs of a different story type. 4 books in, we've had 2 mysteries, a fun thriller, and I'd put this more as like a pulp adventure. It sort of reminded me a bit more of like an Edgar Rice Burroughs, not quite Tarzan, but, an Edgar Rice Burroughs type pulp adventure style. Yeah, very impressed by her ability to tune her writing style depending on the type of story she's telling, even if I do occasionally have sort of issues with the way the plot is presented. Having read this now, I'm trying to think back as to why I disliked it so much last year, and I don't know why, because I really did quite enjoy it as a light adventure story this time around. So anything else we want to discuss?
Yes. I ended up going and looking up some information around the riots in 1922 around Johannesburg, because I didn't know much about that. And I found it all very interesting to read it, how quickly it fizzled out, how it didn't really do very much. I liked Anne's line. I wish that one could be sure that the right people were the ones that get killed. I mean, the ones who wanted to fight, not just all the poor people who happen to live in the parts where the fighting is going on. And I found that still valid today, very insightful. It's always the wrong people that get caught in the middle and end up suffering. But I thought that was a really insightful line for her to write.
I'm with you on the historical accuracy of the situation in South Africa at the time. I think I haven't actually done the reading that you have, so I need to sort of dig into that a bit more. I think I saw mentioned somewhere that she wrote, or at least started writing this one while she was in South Africa on the Grand Tour, but I think that goes back to what we were talking about the Millhouse mystery as well earlier on, that I don't know if she wrote the thing while she was in South Africa, but it definitely reads like she was there.
I think she wrote some of it. She was always a voracious note taker of ideas. So whether it was a series of notes or whether it was fleshed out as a plot, I haven't read anything that says either way. But there is conversation of her trying to finish up the book when they got back. She didn't finish it, but she started it while they were traveling. And I think that, like you said, that really comes alive because she was probably at sometimes looking at the things she was describing. Yeah,
definitely got the feeling that she was there through her characters. Talking of characters, I have one other question. So is the Colonel Race here the same character that David Niven plays in the Peter Ustinov movie version of Death on the Nile?
Yes. Appears in a few more. I think his character might change descriptions, but he mostly works for the Secret Service or the police in some activity. She was very loose with descriptions of some of her characters. I don't think when she was writing him at the beginning, she thought she'd use him again.
So I look forward to finding out a bit more about our mysterious man from the Secret Service then.
Yes, he's a good character. Okay, let's talk about the adaptations. What were they and what did we think of them?
Let's start off with television. The Man in the Brown Suit was adapted by Alan Shane Productions in association with Warner Brothers Television and aired on the CBS network in the US on the 4th of January 1989. It is set in a later era than the 1920s, and many details were changed as a result. The setting, for instance, is not South Africa, but Cairo. It does not appear to be available on any streaming channel or anything at the moment. And from what we can tell, the reviews are generally poor. There was also a French TV adaptation in 2017 as an episode of the French television series Les Petites Meurtres de Agatha Christie. Apologies for the butchered French. But other than that, I don't really know any more details about it. Any other adaptations we want to talk about, Jill?
Well, I think we need to talk about the graphic novel adaptation. The Man in the Brown Suit was released by HarperCollins as a graphic novel adaptation on the 16th of July in 2007. What did you think of this one, Alan?
I actually thought it was the most effective of the Agatha Christie graphic novel adaptations we've read so far. Again, to my point about the plot, the creative team here take her interwoven story, flashbacks and exposition dumps, and actually makes it a more linear narrative that makes the plot easier to follow. For me, made the plot easier to follow than it was in the source novel. I mean, it opens with the diamond robbery and then sort of moves forward a couple of years and then moves forward a couple more years. I really like the way they did that. I think this time around, it was a different artist. The art is clear and the various characters distinctive and easy to recognize, which have made a change. Though, just as a sort of comics guy, I don't know why the editor didn't pick it up, but their comparative heights to some of their surroundings is occasionally off from an art point of view that makes them look like they're about 3 foot tall in some panels. Either that or they inhabit rooms with exceedingly large ceilings and exceedingly large doors. Other than that little artistic gripe, I thought it was a very well executed adaptation that I found an easier read than I did the original novel, certainly the first time round. So, for me, the best of the graphic novel adaptations so far. What about you, Joe?
I agree. I think it's the best one for the way it tells the story and the artwork. It all made sense. I thought it followed the book fairly well. There were bits missing. But like with any adaptation, that's going to happen depending on the way you're adapting the story. But I didn't feel it affected the story at all. Artwork was much better than the last few, as you said. But in general, I think I enjoyed it. It read nicely. I did like having the diamond theft at the beginning. I thought that made much more sense as a visual story being told. Although it didn't bother me as much as it did you with those knowledge dumps in the book anyway. No, I thought it was probably my favorite. My main pick on this was they put Anne in jeans, as they weren't common outside of the USA until the 1930s. Somebody like Anne, who didn't have a lot of money, she couldn't go around just buying the latest fashions. I thought that was a bit of a blooper because they were fairly obviously jeans, not another different type of trouser or pants. So that kind of annoyed me, but...
I mean, that's the sort of thing editorial you would have hoped picked up, but it's a minor point, I guess, like the very large rooms and doors. So.
Yeah, it didn't take away from my enjoyment. It was just one of those things of, oh, that's odd.
So that was it for adaptations, not many.
No.
Just a couple of TV shows and a graphic novel this time around.
Here we are in the section where I talk about my favorite quote. I'm really enjoying looking these up. It's a lot of fun. As Agatha said, it was by now beginning to dawn on me that perhaps I might be a writer by profession. I was not sure of it yet. I still had the idea that writing books was only a natural successor to embroidering sofa cushions. And I think that's wonderful that she thought it was just something she did. It was a hobby, especially when we know now, looking back that, and then she wasn't being coy or anything, but looking back, you think, God, all the books she's written, and even after having 4 published, she still feels that it's just a little hobby. I love that.
Very humble.
Yes.
Okay, thanks for joining us for this episode of the Chronological Christie podcast. If you would like to leave a rating or a review on your favorite podcast platform, that would be great. And don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss out on future episodes. If you'd like to discuss any aspect of this episode, you can message us on the Chronological Christie Instagram account, a link for which will be in the show notes. And you can find us on social media. Where can you be found, Jill?
I can be found on the Chronological Christie Instagram account, and I'm looking forward to chatting to you all there.
And I can be found on most social media platforms by just searching for @AlanJPorter or via my author's website at alanjporter.com. Or if you want to keep up with our various writing projects, you can sign up for the free weekly newsletter at alanjporter.substack.com.
The books discussed on this podcast can be found on a dedicated Chronological Christie section of our online bookstore at bookshop.org. The link will also be in the show note. Please join us for our next episode, where we will be discussing the collection of short stories also released in 1924, Poirot Investigates. We look forward to you joining us.
The music used in this episode was extracted from I'm Somebody Somebody Now by the Joe Venuti Orchestra, and it is a public domain recording. The Chronological Christie podcast is a production of Megrin Entertainment, a division of 4J's Group, LLC.